Brill and the Dragators by Peggy Downing. Chapter 8. New Prisoner. When the eastern sky began to lighten, Brill climbed down from his tree. Blood rushed to his cramped legs, causing prickles of pain. He walked through the forest, carefully eluding the soldiers who were still searching for the king. As he walked through the orchard, he picked 2 peaches, though the knot in his stomach had taken away his usual morning hunger. He hoped no one had noticed his absence. A guard stationed at the garden door demanded, "What are you doing here?" "I was just getting my morning peaches." "I didn't see you come out." "I used the door by the kitchen." The guard looked at Brill and scowled. "The prince will be angry if I'm not there when he wakes up," pleaded Brill. The guard said, "You can go in." Brill hurried to his room. He quickly took off his clothes, hid his homespuns, and put on clean palace clothes. Later, Grosstare summoned him, the prince's eyes glistening with excitement. "Right after breakfast, I want to go to the throne room. Mailpar says Talder escaped from prison last night. If he tries to lead a rebellion, there will be war until every rebel is killed. Isn't that exciting?" "How could he escape?" asked Brill. "I don't know. We'll hear more details from Father. I'm glad we get a little excitement once in a while to break the monotony. The people who helped the king will all be executed, and that's fun to watch." Brill thought of Segra and shuddered. In the throne room, an unhappy Emperor Immane waved his fat arms as he discussed the situation with his council, who sat in a half-circle of chairs around his throne. "Don't you see what this means? We have rebels right here on Palatial Island. I thought we had killed them all during the last purge. I can't trust anyone." One council member stood and bowed. "Your Majesty, it appears that the old king was helped by a young girl who is now under arrest. Surely we have nothing to fear from her." The emperor snapped. "You can be sure she didn't plan the escape. There must have been some men involved, but they all got away." "Surely she can be made to reveal the names of the others," the council member said. Yes, of course, I'll find out the names." The emperor smiled at the thought. Brill shivered. He felt sick at the thought of what they might do to make her talk. He had to help Segra escape. But how? The prison guards would be much more alert after the escape of their most famous prisoner. The emperor announced, "Soldiers throughout the empire are on full alert. We have nothing to fear." Another council member stood. "Your Majesty, do you have a definite word on what happened to Talder?" "Oh, didn't I tell you?" An evil smile twisted the emperor's face. "This is the best news of all. We recaptured the king. He will be executed on Empire Day as planned." The council cheered. Prince Grosstare leaned over to Brill. "I'm glad to hear that. We'll have a great celebration after all." Brill nodded absently. The emperor must be lying. He had seen Peachy dive under the water with the king. Brill had a good view from his tree. He would have seen if Peachy had surfaced again. Brill was sure the king had drowned. So who was the emperor planning to throw to the Dragators on Empire Day? Emperor Immane dismissed his council. As soon as they were gone, Princess Fleurette ran up to the throne, tears running down her cheeks. "Please, Father, don't kill Segra. She's my best friend." "Segra is a traitor, my dear. She must die." Fleurette began to cry louder. I love Segra. She wouldn't hurt anyone. It's all a mistake. Oh, please let me see Segra. I'm sure she'll be able to explain it all." The exalted emperor spoke sternly. "Fleurette, I cannot allow traitors to live. Don't you realize how we have to constantly fight against rebels who want to kill us?" But Segra wouldn't. The Emperor roared. "Segra helped Taldur escape. This is the man who wants to take over my empire. Segra must die. We'll send scouts out to find another companion for you." Fleurette pouted. No one will be as much fun as Segra." Prince Grosstare waddled up to the throne. "Father, can Brill and I sit in the front row at the execution? Brill has never seen one." "Of course, my son." Brill swallowed. He didn't want a front row seat for an execution. Early the next morning, Brill slipped out of the palace and headed for the prison. He saw that his chances of talking to Segra looked grim. 2 guards walked around the prison at 15-minute intervals. The tree growing by the courtyard wall had been chopped down. It would never again be used to help anyone escape. Brill wondered if Segra had been put in the cell where the king had been. When the guards had passed, he rushed up to the wall and called through the hole. "Segra, are you there?" A familiar voice answered, "I fear no evil, for God has his hand upon me." Brill felt a chill from his scalp to his toes. "Grandfather? What are you doing here?" "Brill, is that you?" "Yes, Grandfather. Why did they arrest you?" "I was teaching some of the village children God's laws. I was following God's will. They arrested me and put me in this cell. When I got here, I heard one of the men say, 'He looks just like him with that gray beard and hair.' Do you know what they meant?" Brill's blood turned cold. He had a horrible feeling the Emperor had found a substitute for Taldur. No one had seen the king for many years, and the Emperor had killed most of his relatives and friends. No one would know that Grandfather was not the king. Brill cried, "Oh, Grandfather, you're in great danger." "With the Lord taking care of me, I've nothing to fear. If this is the time he wants to call me to heaven, I'm ready. You'd better get away before those guards come back." "How's Mother?" "She's fine." "Goodbye, Grandfather." Brill ran back to the palace. Empire Day was in 4 days, and now he had 2 people to rescue. The next morning, Brill heard a soft knocking on his door. He felt his throat catch. It sounded like Segra's knock, and he hurried to the door, hoping by some miracle he'd find her. Instead, he found Princess Fleurette, her eyes red from weeping. "Will you go with me to the prison? I must see Segra, but I'm afraid to go through the woods alone." "I'd be glad to go with you, Fleurette," Brill answered. "Here, let me carry your basket." She handed him a basket full of fruit, nuts, and sweets, and he followed as she marched out the front door. The guards bowed, hiding their surprised looks at seeing her up so early. Brill walked a couple of paces behind her as they passed through the garden and orchard and came to the forest path. "You go first and knock the cobwebs out of the way," said Fleurette. "I'm scared of spiders." Brill nodded. "I'll de-web the path for you." He thought, after riding a Dragator, I guess a little spider won't scare me. Maybe I am getting braver. They marched up to the front entrance of the prison. The princess announced to the 2 guards standing on either side of the door, "I have come to see Segra." "No visitors allowed," snapped one. Fleurette's green eyes flashed. "Do you know who I am?" He looked at her closely and gasped. You're the princess, but what are you doing here?" "I must see Segra." The guards looked puzzled. One said, "You can go in, Your Highness." A guard led them down a dark corridor to a small cell. He unlocked the metal door. They walked through the cell to the tiny walled courtyard where Segra sat. Fleurette threw her arms around her. "Please tell me how you got mixed up in the king's escape. I know you wouldn't do anything wrong." "I'm afraid you can't help me. The evidence is too strong." "But I love you. I couldn't bear to see you executed." Segra blinked back tears. "Thanks for coming, Fleurette," she said in a choked voice. Fleurette began to sob. Finally, she said, I'll keep begging Father to spare your life." Brill walked around the courtyard trying to work out how he could help Segra escape. A tunnel under the wall? That would take too long. A ladder against the wall? He'd have to climb to the top of the wall, pull up the ladder, then put it down on the other side. Brill shivered. The guards would be sure to catch him. There was no way to get Segra out of the prison. Fleurette looked at him.
"What are you doing?"
"Just waiting while you're talking," he said.
"Brill, we have to help Segra escape."
"I don't know how we can do that," he answered. At that point, the guard opened the cell door. "It's time to leave, Your Highness."
"We'll come again,"
Fleurette whispered.
"Thank you for the basket. I shall enjoy it,"
said Segra. They followed the guard through the cell and out the corridor. He slammed the door and locked it. As they walked back through the woods, Fleurette cried,
"I can't bear to think of poor Segra living in that terrible place with cobwebs and black bugs running all around. It was awful."
"Segra is very brave," Brill said.
"If we could help her escape, she could go home to her mountain. I know Father wouldn't let her be my companion anymore, but I want to get her out of that cell. Please help me think of a way."
"I'll try," promised Brill. After breakfast, Prince Grosstare decided to go to the play park. All Brill wanted to do was sit alone and think of some way to help Segra and his grandfather escape. It wasn't enough to be brave. He had to make his brain think up a foolproof plan. The last escape plan had only made things worse. It was hard to think with Prince Grosstare chattering and expecting witty replies. "Oh, look," said the prince as his carriage pulled away from the palace. "There comes the execution squad with the prisoner." He called to the driver. "Stop, I want to watch." 8 soldiers marched along the road. Walking between them, and held securely by 2 soldiers, was Brill's grandfather. He walked with his head held high. Brill swallowed the lump in his throat. They shouldn't need all those soldiers to guard one old man. "Hey, remember, he almost got away. There might be rebels around." "Where are they taking him?" "To the dungeon under the palace. Nobody has ever escaped from there. Soldiers will watch him day and night until he's thrown to the Dragators." As the soldiers passed the carriage, Brill heard his grandfather say, "We are all imprisoned by evil until we accept Christ, whose love sets us free." Then he looked up and saw Brill. He smiled as if to say, "I'm fine." Brill's helplessness clamped like a cruel hand squeezing his heart. Prince Grosstare jeered. "You'll make a tasty lunch for the Dragators, you rebel king." Before grandfather could answer, the soldiers had hurried him toward the palace. The prince motioned for the carriage to move. Brill wondered what would happen if he stood up at the execution and shouted that they were executing his grandfather and not King Talder. Even that wouldn't stop the execution. He'd only be denounced as a liar. As they came to the play park, the prince complained, "You're no fun today. You better stop looking so miserable or I'll find a new companion." Brill heard the threat, but it failed to scare him. He couldn't see any ray of hope in a life which continued to bring new disasters each day. As he lay in bed that night, Brill decided that the best thing to do was run away. He'd go the night before Empire Day because people would be too busy celebrating the next day to look for him. That way, he wouldn't have to watch his grandfather be thrown to the Dragators. Even the thought of it made him sick. He couldn't bear to be there. His mother needed him now that his grandfather was no longer there to help. He thought longingly of hiding in one of the hill caves near the farm. His mother would bring him food. He'd be safe then. Unless someone suspected his mother and followed her. What if they arrested her, too? Lord, help me do what's best, not only for me, but for those I love. I don't want to put Mother in danger. I'd like to help Segra, but I can't think of a way. Please help me to know what you want me to do." The night before Empire Day, Brill slipped out of the palace, picked up peaches for Peachy, and walked through the woods. Peachy was sleeping in his usual place, but as Brill looked down, an idea came to him of how to rescue Segra. He argued with himself. Don't go back now, not when you have a way to escape. I can't leave Segra if there's a chance to help her. It won't work. It'll be too much danger. I know it's risky, but I have to try. I just have to. Brill tossed the peaches to Peachy and went back to the palace. He needed to see Fleurette, for the plan depended on her, but there was no time the next morning. When he woke up, he found that an excited Grosstare was already awake and Brill couldn't slip away. After breakfast, Prince Grosstare's excitement grew. Come on, Brill, let's go to our seats for the parade and execution. Brill said, I don't feel very good. I think I'll stay here. You can't miss the biggest event of the year. You'll feel better when you see all the fancy costumes in the parade. I want you to come, Grosstare said in the stubborn tone that would not allow any argument. Brill walked behind him. He couldn't bear to watch the execution, but what choice did he have? He concentrated on plans for Segra's escape. The prince slowly climbed the stairs of the reviewing stand. He grasped the rails to help lift his great bulk up each stair. They sat in upholstered chairs which provided a perfect view of the drawbridge and the moat below. Princess Fleurette was already there. She said mournfully, I wish Segra were here. Prince Grosstare laughed. Don't feel bad, Fleurette. Segra will be the star of our next execution.
You're horrid. Simply horrid.
Fleurette began to sob. As the parade began, Brill saw dancers in colorful costumes and heard bands playing lively music. Each unit stopped in front of the Emperor's stand. Jugglers threw balls around, and horsemen did tricks on their decorated horses. Many marchers carried signs that read, Long live our exalted Emperor. Brill couldn't enjoy the spectacle. He could only think that each minute brought the execution closer. In the moat, several Dragators gathered, apparently curious about the music. Brill tried to watch the parade entertainers, but his eyes kept turning back to the hungry Dragators. At the tail of the parade, a man began to beat a large drum. More Dragators swam up. Apparently they knew what the drum meant. The creatures crowded under the bridge, shoving and snapping at one another with their sharp teeth. Some stretched their scaly necks from the water and opened their sharp-toothed mouths. The crowd on the far side of the moat pushed and shoved to see the Dragators better. Prince Grosstare nudged Brill. Look at that big one with the jagged teeth. I hope he gets the king. Brill's heart pounded as rapidly as the frenzied drum beats. He saw 8 soldiers approaching with his grandfather. Nothing could save him now. End of chapter 8.